Welcome to LC Screen Talk. My name is Larry, and this is my review of Pier Kids. Pier Kids is a documentary that is directed and written by Elegant Breton and follows the lives of several black, gay, and transgender homeless youth as they navigate life out on the pier of New York City. Pier Kids is another film within the CinemaQ Film Festival lineup 2020, and one that I was very much looking forward to. It was described as somewhat of a spiritual successor to the famous and legendary documentary Paris is Burning. So, obviously, being someone who loves that documentary, what it represents, and how much it's influenced just culture, I was really excited to see what this new documentary brought to the table. And I have to say, Pier Kids is a very strong offering. So let's go ahead and talk about those positives. Well, the biggest positive for me is the subject matter and how relevant it is to 2020. Even before the riots and all of that began, the idea of particularly Black, transgender, and gay youth who are homeless is a topic that desperately needed to be brought to the forefront and discussed a larger spread wide scale. And this film really endears you to these people who call the pier their home. And it's really interesting to just see the wonderful community that takes place and is formed amongst these people who have so many similarities in their lives and have found themselves in a tough situation. But what I love is seeing the vibrancy within them, the joy that they bring to just being alive and being with their chosen family and friends. You still see that sparkle, you see that hope, you see their talents, and I love when it's not just a charity case type of subject matter, especially when it easily could fall down that route. Instead, we're celebrating these beautiful people while also acknowledging the hardships of this type of lifestyle and how society has contributed to making it even harder. Now, Crystal LaBeija is kind of our main focus for a good portion of the film, and her story was easily the most interesting of the different storylines we follow. We actually go back to Kansas City, her hometown, with her, and it really broke my heart watching her interact, particularly with her mother and even her aunt, because her aunt really reminded me personally of so many people I know and within my family or within the groups I had grown up with that accept you and love you, but just to an extent. She is that family member who refuses to fully accept your identity and makes it very known and is pretty hard edge in that, but does actually love you, and it kind of falls under what feels like a facade of support. Really interesting dynamic that I know a lot of people can relate to and see their own relationships within. It was also wonderful because we got to meet Crystal's older brothers who were very supportive and very wonderful. So getting to see her interact with her given family, her born family, if you will, was very fascinating. And she as a person was very fascinating. The film was also very positive about sex work and the identity of these poor and homeless youth and within the LGBTQ plus community who do go out and do sex work, but it doesn't shame them or try to put any sort of negative light on what's happening. It talks to these people and they get to explain their story and what they're going through. And that's what I loved. It has a lot of talking head moments, but this documentary particularly does a lot of showing. We just live amongst people for so much of the time. It's without a judgmental lens, and I think that is very important and does a lot to serve the issue that it's trying to tackle. So then, what doesn't work so well when it comes to Pier Kids? My biggest problem actually is that we focused on one too many characters. So there's a tragedy that takes place in this film, and actually that's going to lead me straight into my next negative as well. But the person that the tragedy happens to is introduced so late in the documentary, and we get so little time with them that it doesn't have the same impact as the death that we see on screen in Paris is Burning. Here, we don't really get to know them. And that's the case with a lot of these stories. Some of them we come in and out of, we touch on a person, we briefly understand who they are, but we don't really get to know their story. And I wish we had really focused in maybe on just two, maybe even three full stories, kind of got the landscape, and we really just kind of focused on them as the beacons of our story for the film purposes. But it spreads itself a little bit too thin and doesn't go as deep into a lot of these issues as I wish it would have, and it could have, because this is under an hour and a half long. So there was plenty of time to expand these stories out just a bit. And my other negative is that I think it's a little bit intrusive of a documentary. Particularly, we get to that tragedy scene that I mentioned with one of our characters, and it felt very intrusive, very voyeuristic, actually. I was quite uncomfortable with the camera being in that darker setting with people mourning and people being so sad. I didn't like that, honestly, and I understand we're trying to capture everything, but we could have gotten to that message without being in that room at that time. It made me very uncomfortable and not in a positive way. And while I appreciated this film felt very raw and realistic, there were often times where the camera would go places that I didn't think was quite necessary, or some of the shots, they just felt too intrusive. But overall, Pier Kids is a really strong documentary that needed to be made. This issue of people of color within the LGBTQIA community that are shut out and homeless, they don't have healthcare, they don't have the access they need, and thus they're out here living on the streets, is one that desperately, desperately needs to be addressed. It isn't getting that attention and care that it really needs to be. So I am so thankful that the film Pier Kids exists. It's not quite on the level of Paris is Burning, but it certainly has its own value on its own terms. So once it becomes available, please make sure you are keeping your eye out so you too can watch Pier Kids. Well, that is my review of Pier Kids. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead, click like down below and subscribe to the channel so you are always up to date on my latest videos. Also, join in on the discussion. Are you excited to see Pier Kids? And what is your favorite LGBTQIA plus documentary? Let me know either in the comment section down below, or you can hit me up on Twitter. I love you all so much for your continued support. Mwah! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!